They started with just one, but every night there were more. And I had no idea where they came from or what was following them into my home. It all started with a gold coin. This is a story about Juju the cat, who brings home a gold coin each day. It began like any other evening in the quiet corner of Dorset countryside, a night stitched together by the soft hiss of wind through bare hedgerows and the distant cry of an owl. Inside a modest, ivy-draped cottage sat Jennifer Hartley, 60 years old, her world as still and predictable as the flames dancing in her hearth. She'd grown used to silence since her husband's passing 2 winters ago. The only sound punctuating that quiet was the steady tick of the grandfather clock and the occasional thud of paws on polished wood. Juju, her British Shorthair, had been her sole companion through the long nights, a regal creature with a plush silver-blue coat and eyes like molten copper. On this evening, as Jennifer adjusted her spectacles and picked up her knitting needles, she heard the familiar flap of the cat door and the pad of paws entering from the garden. She smiled faintly without looking up. "There you are, troublemaker," she murmured, voice softened by fondness. But then she saw it something glinting between his teeth. Not a mouse, not a leaf dragged in from the garden. Metallic, gleaming even in the dull lamplight. Juju trotted into the circle of fire's glow, tail flicking in a slow arc of pride. With deliberate grace, he dropped the object at her feet and sat back on his haunches, amber eyes locked on hers. Jennifer frowned, leaning forward. The thing was cold and startlingly heavy when she picked it up, a coin, thick and old, its edges dulled by time. She turned it over, searching for clues. No date, no minting mark, only an emblem etched deep into its center, a serpent coiled around a crown. The grooves were worn smooth in places, as though hundreds of hands had touched it before hers. "What on earth?" Her voice trailed into the firelight. Juju blinked slowly, his gaze unreadable, then began to wash his paws with maddening calm, as if presenting her with treasure was a trivial affair. Jennifer set the coin on the mantel and tried to laugh, telling herself it was some odd trinket, perhaps dropped by a hiker on the trail that skirted the back garden. But when Juju returned the next day with another coin, and the day after that with a third, the quiet certainties of her life began to crack. By the 5th day, the linen napkin on her kitchen table bore a glittering hoard of 5 identical coins, each one an enigma. And in the hush between tick and tock of the grandfather clock, Jennifer asked the question that would change everything. Where was he getting them? The 5th coin sat on the table like a sullen guest, catching the watery light of a grey morning. Jennifer stared at it, chin propped on her hand, steam curling from her untouched tea. Her laptop lay open beside her, pages of search results glowing across the screen. Antique gold coin serpent emblem, British treasure 19th century, shipwreck coins, UK. Search after search yielded little more than whispers, myths, and maritime tragedies, ghost stories dressed up as history. But one name threaded through the digital haze: the Aurelia, a merchant ship, lost in 1887. Last seen off the Cornish coast before vanishing into a storm. Its cargo? Gold bullion, trade coins, and 4 sealed chests bound for a royal commission. None of it recovered. Jennifer's pulse skittered as she read the brittle words of an archive newspaper. Some say the sea claimed her, others that the Aurelia simply disappeared, as though the ocean had swallowed her whole. She leaned back, throat dry. The idea was absurd. She lived 30 miles from the coast. And yet, as her gaze slid to the coins, doubt seeped in like a draft under the door. A muffled thud jolted her. She spun in her chair. Juju sat by the back door, tail curling like smoke. At his feet lay another coin, this one slick with mud. Jennifer knelt, her knees protesting, and lifted it carefully. Damp earth clung to the grooves of the serpent emblem. Her breath feathered the air. "You've been digging." The cat stared at her, unblinking. Then, with an almost theatrical slowness, he turned his head toward the dark pane of the window, where the garden ended and the forest began. Jennifer followed his gaze. The trees loomed like sentinels against a bruised sky, their spidery branches shivering in the wind. Something shifted inside her, an unease that tasted of rust and rain. The days slipped by in a blur of obsession. Jennifer scoured maritime records, pored over leather-bound ledgers at the village library, her fingertips smudged with the ghosts of old ink. Every scrap of knowledge seemed to draw her closer to something vast and nameless. One entry in a rotting logbook snagged her breath. The Aurelia crew unaccounted for. Cargo, 17 crates, gold coin, 4 locked chests. Destination, undisclosed. The librarian, a stooped man with a voice like dry paper, peered over his spectacles. "Curious case, that one," he murmured. "Some say the ship never sank, just vanished." Jennifer closed the book with trembling hands. As she walked home under a lid of pewter sky, a thought coiled in her mind like smoke. If the Aurelia never reached shore, how had its treasure surfaced here miles inland, buried in a wood no map ever named? That night, sleep scattered like frightened birds. She tossed beneath her quilt, the silence broken only by the relentless tick of the grandfather clock, until it stopped. At 3:17 a.m., the sound ceased, as though strangled mid-breath. A hush fell, thick as velvet. Then came a scrape, faint, from downstairs. Jennifer slid from bed, heart a snared bird in her chest. She crept to the landing, breath-trembling clouds in the icy air. Below, a sliver of moonlight spilled across the hall, and there sat Juju, his fur puffed, eyes twin embers in the dark. Between his paws gleamed another coin. Morning brought no comfort. The coins lay in their silent heap, their serpent emblems catching the pale sun like slitted eyes. Jennifer brewed tea with hands that shook more than age could excuse. Strange things had begun to ripple through her once orderly world. The mirror above the mantel cracked without warning, a jagged wound across its silver skin. The grandfather clock resumed ticking at dawn, its pendulum swaying as if nothing had happened. And always the sense of being watched, a pressure in the walls like held breath. Juju grew restless, pacing from window to window, tail lashing in mute agitation. Sometimes he froze, ears pricked toward the forest, as though listening to something Jennifer could not hear. By evening, resolve coiled tight in her gut. She slipped on her wool coat, pocketed a flashlight, and when Juju slunk to the door, casting her that look half invitation, half command, Jennifer followed him into the teeth of the night. The wind tasted of iron, the forest loomed ahead, its branches clawing at the bruised sky, and somewhere in the darkness, something waited, something that wanted her to find it. The garden gate whispered shut behind her, its rusted hinges sighing like an old ghost. Jennifer gripped the flashlight so tightly her knuckles whitened, its pale beam slicing a narrow wound through the dark. Ahead, Juju glided soundlessly down the overgrown path, his silver fur a phantom shimmer in the gloom. The air changed the moment she stepped under the first arching limbs of the forest. It pressed close, thick and damp, tasting of moss and secrets. Leaves whispered in a wind she couldn't feel. "Juju," she called softly, voice brittle as frost. "Where are you taking me?" The cat paused at a fork in the path, copper eyes glinting like embers. Then, without a sound, he veered left into a tunnel of trees that seemed to pulse with shadow. Jennifer followed, breath ragged, boots sinking into loam. Her flashlight's beam caught shards of movement, the pale gleam of fungi, a broken bird's wing, roots curling like knotted fingers. She kept glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see another shape flitting through the dark. They walked for what felt like hours, the hush broken only by the soft crunch of leaves beneath her boots. And once, a sound that didn't belong, a whisper, thin as silk. "Turn back." Jennifer froze. The word melted into the wind, so faint she could have imagined it. But when she swung the light in a frantic arc, the trees only stared back, mute and endless. Juju hissed low in his throat, fur rippling along his spine. Then he darted ahead, tail a silver slash in the dark. "Wait!" Jennifer stumbled after him, heart hammering a frantic drumbeat. Branches clawed at her coat, their twigs scoring white scratches against the wool. The air smelled sharper, now metallic, like rain striking iron. Then, abruptly, the trees broke. She staggered into a clearing hemmed by brambles. And there, crouched in a cradle of roots, lay a shape that stole the breath from her lungs. A chest, ancient, iron-bound, its wood swollen and blackened by time. One corner had splintered, spilling a small heap of coins onto the moss. They glowed dully in her beam, each etched with the serpent and crown. Jennifer's pulse thundered in her ears. Slowly she knelt, fingertips grazing the nearest coin. It was slick with mud and something thicker, something that clung like sap. She lifted it to the light. Her stomach turned. Dark smears marred the grooves, smears the color of old blood. Behind her, a branch cracked, loud, close. Jennifer whirled, flashlight jerking wildly. "Who's there?" The night answered with silence. Then another sound, soft and sinuous, curling through the dark like smoke. A voice. "Put it back." Jennifer froze at the sight of him, a silhouette at the far edge of the clearing, his body half swallowed by the fog. The man was tall, impossibly thin, dressed in a coat so threadbare it hung from him like wet paper. His skin seemed stretched too tightly across his face, the eyes sunk deep and glimmering faintly in the weak moonlight. He stood utterly still, save for the twitch of his jaw, like something chewing from the inside. The air around him seemed to bend, muffling the wind. "You shouldn't have taken it," he rasped, voice low, almost swallowed by the forest. "It was meant to stay where it was." Jennifer's grip tightened on the coin in her pocket. "Who are you?" she demanded, though her voice betrayed her with a tremor. "The one who's been watching," he said. "The one who knows what follows the gold." Before she could reply, Juju padded between them, fur bristling, a low growl rumbling deep in his throat. The man's lips curled in what might have been a smile or a grimace. His gaze flicked once to Juju, a flash of recognition there, as if seeing an old accomplice. "She's coming for it," he said, his voice breaking into a whisper. "And she'll want more than the coin." Then, without a sound, he stepped backward into the mist and was gone. The next morning, Jennifer found a new coin on her doormat. Her heart pounded as she crouched to pick it up. Same size, same weight, same coiled serpent and crown engraving. She scanned the street empty, only the cold morning air and the quiet tap of a loose shutter. When Juju returned that evening, there was another coin, this time dropped at her feet, warm as though it had just been held. Over the next week, the trail grew 7, 8, 9 coins now. Too many for chance, too few for ransom. She found coins on the porch, on the windowsill, even inside the locked kitchen. Juju's fur began to take on a faint metallic scent, and at night she swore she heard him moving about long after she'd gone to bed. One evening, as she bent to collect yet another coin, and thought she heard a faint, shapeless whisper curl from the hedge, gone before she could be sure, she noticed faint markings scratched into the wood of the porch circles within circles, and an eye at the center. Jennifer's search for answers led her to an antique shop at the edge of town, a cramped space smelling of dust and candle wax. The shopkeeper, a thin woman with eyes too sharp to be kind, examined the coin in silence before reaching under the counter. "This," she said, producing a tarnished piece of glass no larger than her palm, "will show you what the coin remembers. But be warned, you can't unsee it." That night, Jennifer sat at her kitchen table, Juju curled in her lap, and held the glass over the coin. Shapes began to form dark water, a ship listing in a storm, figures huddled on deck, their faces hidden under hoods. And then, a shape rising from the sea, pale and immense, crowned with bone. The image shattered into darkness. Jennifer jerked back so hard her chair scraped the floor. Her stomach rolled, bile rising, and she nearly dropped the glass as cold sweat prickled her skin. Jennifer's hands shook so violently she almost dropped the glass. 3 nights later, the scratching began. At first, she thought it was Juju wanting to be let in, but when she opened the door, he was already inside, sitting in the hallway, staring toward the entrance with unblinking eyes. The scratching grew louder, sharper, until it sounded like claws on wood. A voice whispered through the keyhole, low, feminine, and impossibly cold. "Give it back." Jennifer slammed the deadbolt and stepped away. Juju leapt from the floor to the windowsill, tail lashing, gaze fixed on the dark beyond the glass. The following evening, she found the back door ajar. The lock hung twisted, splintered as if something had forced its way in. Her kitchen smelled of salt water and rotting wood. On the table, arranged in a perfect circle, lay every coin Juju had brought her, their surfaces gleaming wetly in the dim light. Juju crouched beside them, ears flat, and hissed as Jennifer entered. His pupils were wide, his body taut. She gathered the coins into a box, her breath coming in short bursts. As she closed the lid, a low hum seemed to vibrate through the air. That night, the fog rolled in thick and fast, smothering the street. Jennifer woke to the sound of shattering glass downstairs. For one wild moment, she considered calling the police, but the phone in her hand was dead, black screen staring back at her. She grabbed the box of coins and Juju, shoving them both into her coat, and ran. Shapes moved in the fog, tall, thin, loping with unnatural speed. She sprinted toward the woods, her breath burning in her lungs, Juju clinging to her shoulder. The shapes followed, whispering in voices that slid under her skin. At the clearing, the ground gave way beneath her feet, and she fell to her knees before the moss-covered mound where she'd first seen Juju drop a coin. Something gleamed in the soil. She clawed at the dirt until her fingers closed on cold metal. A key, heavy and rusted, engraved with the serpent and crown. The whispers rose in a chorus. One must stay, one must serve. Juju leapt from her arms, standing between her and the darkness pooling at the edge of the clearing. The man from before stepped into view, eyes wide with fear. "Now you've done it," he said. The fog swallowed him whole, and when it cleared, she was alone except for Juju, who padded back to her side, the key clamped in his jaws. From somewhere deep in the trees came the final whisper, curling like smoke into her ear. "Bring it back." She clutched the key to her chest, the weight of it anchoring her in a reality that suddenly felt far too thin.